Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Femcast Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite, family-friendly, non-controversial topic of all time that you should always make sure to bring up at the dinner table. That is right, everybody. Today we're not just going to be talking about we're not talking about abortion. We're talking about neopronouns, which I guess that's like the second best thing to bring up at the dinner table. Obviously, you should always bring up abortion as well, but you know. So without further ado, I think we should get right into the meat of the topic, if you know what I'm saying. So when it comes to my takes on neopronouns, I think I have some interesting takes. Yeah, I know. Who would have guessed? Me making a video where I talk about something that is inconsequential but also kind of controversial. Who would have guessed? And wow, even more surprising, me having a nuanced take. Oh my goodness, who would have guessed? I know I sure wouldn't have. It's funny because I actually was live when I did a debate with another streamer/YouTuber named DemonMama. And we had actually planned this a little bit ahead of time because I asked her on Discord if I could debate her on neopronouns. Now, my position going into it was neopronouns are only fine if the person using them gives you the option to use they, them, or pronouns that are normal, I guess. My position has changed slightly. I don't entirely agree with DemonMama on this, but ultimately, I would say that, and you're gonna hate me because I sound like a cringe centrist right now when I say this, but I am neither in favor of nor opposed to neopronouns. Yep, I said it. I said the thing that will make both sides absolutely despise me. And that's great. I mean, that's the goal, is to be hated by as many people as possible. That being said, though, I think when it comes to people that exclusively use neopronouns and nothing else, I have never met anybody who uses neopronouns, let alone someone who uses them exclusively. And because of that, it's kind of hard to say what an interaction like that would be like. I mean, and even if I had an interaction with somebody like that, it would still be unfair for me to take that and extrapolate it onto everybody who uses neopronouns. So there's really no good way for me to do this in terms of my personal experience, because let's be real, I don't have any personal experience with the issue. At the end of the day, though, that doesn't mean I have any less authority on the topic. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to talk about. But I think that there is still a nuanced discussion that can be had. So there are a few things that need to be established before we even begin this discussion. At least things about me that need to be established that are what led me to come to the conclusions that I have. The first is the axiomatic principle I almost always abide by, which is everything is justified as a freedom until there's a logical reason for it not to be. Now, this may sound simple on the surface, because I guess it is, but there are there are a lot of instances where the water gets muddied quite a bit, right? For instance, I think that this entire debate is an example of that. And that's why originally I had and honestly, that's why it wasn't very difficult to change my mind on Xenogender. Literally just, again, DemonMama was the person that changed my mind on that. That was why I wanted to have the neopronouns discussion with her. But the reason why it was way easier to sway me to be, I don't know if I would say I take an affirmative position, but I definitely don't take a negative position when it comes to Xenogender at this point. Simply because it doesn't negatively affect me in any way. They have that right to identify themselves that way. They're not telling anybody else that they have to identify anybody a certain way. They're just describing themselves however they want. They are well within their rights to do that, obviously. But when it comes to neopronouns, it's a little bit different because, I feel like there is a distinction between, just identifying as something and expecting other people to do certain things to validate that identity or whatever, right? Now, when it comes to neopronouns, I think that the best thing, the best analogy for them would be like they are like nicknames, but like I guess with pronouns, that is the only sort of good explanation. Like I feel like because it is such an abstract thing that you don't really see you don't see anyone identify this way in real life, right? So it feels very abstract, and therefore all of my arguments are going to be abstract, maybe a little philosophical, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily know what an interaction, like, again, I already said this, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I don't know what an interaction like this would be at the end of the day, or how it would go over, but I guess more in an abstract sense. I don't really understand the need for neopronouns. So the reason I don't take an affirmative position, and why I'm not actively in favor of it, and I'm not saying that I'm actively against it, at least not yet, is because I don't see a logical reason to use pronouns that are like, not normal pronouns. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but, typically pronouns are used to be non-specific. The whole point of them is to not have to, be specific. For instance, if you see somebody who presents as a man walking down the street, they've got short hair, they're wearing a suit and a tie, they've got a beard. I think it's safe to assume that they're probably a man. Not saying that it is necessarily not. I'm not necessarily saying that they are in fact a man definitively, but that is the assumption that you would make, right? Just because of how they're presenting themselves to society, if people dress that way. I mean, obviously, if you make the incorrect assumption, they're like, oh, well, that was only because I was doing a job interview, and I didn't want to wear all of my queer people clothes to the job interview because then I wouldn't get hired or whatever, and it turns out that this person is actually non-binary. Okay, fine, that's a different story. But for the sake of convenience, typically we make these assumptions. And if you want to talk about somebody walking down the street that looks like this, you are most likely to use he or they pronouns because you don't know anything about them. You are being non-specific, and you are basically just referring to somebody that you don't know, right? So you're not going to refer to them by their name or their nickname if they have one. So I think that the same thing would apply with neopronouns, right? Because if neopronouns are like the pronoun equivalent of a nickname, then why you wouldn't know that a person's neopronouns are, well, they're neopronouns. So obviously, the safest assumption, I guess, would be to use they, them pronouns in general. I mean, I sort of, even when it comes to like cisgendered people, right, I use they, them pronouns as well a lot of the time without even realizing it until I actually pay attention to the words that are coming out of my mouth. For instance, if there is a cisgendered man, I will flip-flop back and forth between he and they pronouns without even realizing it. It's a very strange thing, but it is something that I do. I think it probably comes from a place of me just not caring about gender, which at the end of the day isn't even something that I actively want to care about because I really don't. I don't think I should have to care about anything if I don't want to. And that's where the whole idea of neopronouns kind of conflicts with this a little bit, because it's almost like, and I know that maybe this isn't necessarily the intention, but in a way, it almost sort of forces me, in a sense, to care about gender. Because if I am completely indifferent to gender, right, and I just don't see gender as a thing, period, I'm most likely going to just use they, them pronouns for everybody, no matter the context, right? Regardless of what somebody actually identifies as, right? I mean, I already do this a little bit, at least to an extent. But, and obviously I'm probably going to be a little bit more careful if it's like, okay, this person is like obviously trans or whatever, or they look queer, so I should probably ask them what pronouns they like. But again, that's sort of just a general rule of thumb. It's not always going to apply. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but that's coming more from a place of like, okay, for instance, I know it's weird because conservatives will complain about how much they hate they, them pronouns, but then whenever they go on whatever talk show, or I guess, or podcast, or if they're making a video about how much they hate trans women, they will passive aggressive. Something they do is they passive aggressively use they, them pronouns when referring to a trans woman, and the reason they do this is because they don't want to like specifically misgender them with he, him pronouns, because then that might go too far, or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you don't want to get terminated from YouTube, but it's like they don't want to invalidate the person's gender or whatever, but they also don't want to validate it. So because they're not sure what pronouns to use, they use they, them, which is very interesting. Because at the end of the day, I know that they're doing it passive-aggressively as a way of doing it, but then not getting canceled over it, which is very fucking obvious. But it kind of annoys me because it's like, I just want to use they, them pronouns for everybody without it being seen as like a passive-aggressive thing. But in a way, I feel like conservatives are sort of like taking that away. Because it's like, okay, well, if I refer to a trans woman with they, them pronouns, if they only use she, her, if she only uses she, her, you see what I mean? It's like I refer to everybody with they, them pronouns at times. But if there's a trans woman who only uses she, her pronouns, it may be seen as passive-aggressive or potentially like subtly transphobic if I just use they, them as a way of avoiding that sort of external validation, in a sense, by saying that you don't look like somebody who would use she, her pronouns type of shit, right? Like, I don't see you as a woman. You don't pass type of thing. And which is a very shitty thing. And there are some people that do that. So it's like, okay, there are some people where it's like, okay, I have to be careful with the pronouns I use. I mean, I don't have to, but I choose to be, because I generally try to be nice to people, right? But when it comes to neopronouns, I'm just not. I never have bought the. Okay, I can't say I never bought the argument, but of that I'm about to bring up. But I don't buy this argument anymore. The idea that people who use neopronouns are somehow going to make other trans people look bad. I don't like, that's not gonna fucking happen. It's not gonna ruin the English language. It's not gonna ruin the image of the trans community, because at the end of the day, people who hate trans people are going to hate them regardless of whether or not there are people that use neopronouns. And the only reason that they will ever bring up neopronouns is because they use it as almost like some sort of straw man argument. But at the end of the day, they don't do it because anything they say is grounded in reality, or because they actually care about whether or not something is logical or not. The only reason they do it is because they want to be able to point to a group of people that they don't understand, and that the vast majority of society doesn't understand, because it is such a small niche group of people, so that they can point to them and say, oh, look at how dumb these people are, because they are weird, and they do this thing that nobody else does, type of shit. And at the end of the day, that's their only argument, right? And that's how they, and that's, I guess it's something that you see a lot of. Quite unfortunate how there's like not a nuanced debate on this. There are two very lazy arguments that are both dichotomous and equally fucking retarded that you could make, which is either saying that every neopronoun is valid or that none of them are valid. Now, if you are able to come to a logical conclusion, and that just so happens to be the conclusion you've come to after extensive thinking, and you've thought about every different scenario, and not just fucking straw man arguments, and that's genuinely the conclusion you've come to, fair enough. But most of the people that come to this conclusion just haven't thought about it enough, which is interesting. And the reason I say that is because it's like, rather than just writing everything off as invalid or saying that, yep, it's valid no matter what, no exceptions type of thing, I don't feel like that I feel like that's almost anti-intellectual in a sense, right? And again, one of the best comparisons I've heard about neopronouns, whether or not, I mean, you can use this as both an argument for and against neopronouns depending on how you frame it, but them being very similar to like a nickname in a sense. So for instance, if somebody says that their nickname is Jimmy, when their real name is Jimothy. Jimothy's not a fucking name. I don't know why that was the first thing that came. You know what I mean, right? Like something that isn't their legal name. Okay, you would respect that, right? But if somebody decided to make their nickname the N-word, you probably wouldn't use that nickname, right? I feel like the methodology you should use when determining whether or not a neopronoun is valid or not is the same methodology you would use when it comes to somebody's nickname, right? Because I feel like that is the only way you can possibly be consistent. Otherwise, I think at least to an extent, you're going to be a little bit inconsistent there, right? But I'm not sure why it needs to be a pronoun specifically, because the whole point of pronouns, and DemonMama disagrees with me on this, I still kind of believe that the whole point of pronouns is to just be efficient and fast and not take time or energy, which is ultimately why I even think that he and she pronouns are kind of stupid, in a sense, and that it should just be they, them pronouns just in general when referring to a human being. But that's not the case, and honestly, the reason I'm fine with people using whatever pronouns they want for me, including neopronouns, yes, I know, crazy, is I just don't give a shit, because if I gave a shit, then I'd be like, no, I only use they, them pronouns, but I feel like that would sort of defeat the whole point of me not giving a shit, right? Because it's like, well, I do give a shit. I give enough of a shit to take this negative position against certain pronouns, right? And so ultimately, for the sake of consistency, right? Like, I'm not against neopronouns, but I'm also not in favor of them. I don't see a need to use them. It's like, okay, at what point does it become just the same thing as like a nickname or an adjective, right? Because when does it stop being gender identity and start being just a different form of identity, right? I mean, can you make religion a gender identity? Well, I mean, some people would argue yes. I'm not one of them. I don't really think that it has anything to do with gender. Now, I am of the personal belief, and I hope I don't get canceled for this. And again, this is not... Don't take this as a way or like an excuse to like treat people like shit, all right? Just treat people like they're valid. Like, it doesn't hurt. Even if somebody has like a goofy identity, like, I don't know, like something that sounds kind of silly like tree gender. It's like, okay, but realistically, like, you're not gonna fucking die, okay? It's like, yeah, okay, they identify that way. Why do I care? Oh wait, I don't. There's no logical reason for me to. So I just don't give a shit. Even though I don't understand it, really, it's like, okay, not for me, but if that's how they feel about themselves, good for them, I guess. But then also, there's this idea of, okay, well, what is gender even in reference to, right? Well, generally, people in society see gender as something that references either femininity or masculinity. Now, how people define these things is going to vary from person to person, right? There are different cultural standards for what is considered masculine versus what is considered feminine, and a lot of it is arbitrary. But in general, it is ideas or mannerisms or articles of clothing, etc. that are it's like this amalgamation of shit, right? It's like just a bunch of shit, and it's like, okay, well, it's because it's all arbitrary, right? You could make the argument that it doesn't even necessarily have to be femininity or masculinity, or what is recognized as that, because at the end of the day, those things are also arbitrary and could mean anything and or nothing at the same time. However, when it comes to the idea of gender abolition, I think that there is a difference between gender abolition and gender expression abolition. I think that these are actually almost like opposite things. I mean, the whole point of gender abolition is like, okay, it doesn't matter what gender you are. You can do whatever the fuck you want. You can wear whatever clothes you want. You can express yourself in whatever gendered way you want, as masculinely, femininely, or or just you can do your own thing and have it neither be masculine nor feminine, right? And I genuinely do believe that, okay, yeah, the world would be a better place if people weren't immediately put into these arbitrary boxes based on whether or not they're born with a penis or a vagina. I think that it is very fucking stupid for us to, sit here and be like, yes, you are gonna be somebody who is big and strong, doesn't show very much emotion, and you're gonna start out by playing with trucks and doing manly shit. But if you're but you over here, who is basically exactly the fucking same except for what's underneath your pants. You better start out by playing with Barbies, and you better grow up to be a submissive and breedable housewife, okay? That is your goal in life, right? And it's like, okay, obviously that's a little bit of hyperbole on my part, right? Like, it's not like that specifically anymore. Like, there's a bit more leeway, but it's still like some very subtle things, like assuming that before let's say you have a little toddler who was born as a male, right? Why would you assume that they want to do boy things or masculine things when they have showed no interest in it? If they have only acted gender neutral thus far, why would you assume that they want to play with trucks? Well, if you're a logical person, you wouldn't. You would give them the option to play with trucks or Barbies or whatever fucking toys they want to play with. You would just lay them out, all of them out in front of the kid, and then just let them go to town, Just play with whatever fucking toys you want, little Jimmy, okay? I don't give a shit type of attitude. Obviously, you wouldn't word it that way because, you don't say things like that to toddlers usually. I mean you could hypothetically, but I don't think it's a very good idea because then they might repeat that language at preschool or kindergarten and get into a little bit of trouble. But, at the end of the day, whatever. You do you, I guess. I don't really give a shit as long as you're not doing anything that's harmful to the kid, I guess. I don't know. I've always hated the idea of you can't say certain things because it's gonna traumatize a child if they hear that. And it's like, what child is traumatized after hearing the word fuck or the word bitch? Nobody is fucking traumatized after they hear that, okay? That's a fucking stupid assumption to make. And I've never understood why society acts like it's like this huge thing, like, oh, you're a bad person if you swear in front of my kids, and it's like, is it a good idea to do it? Maybe not, just because people will get mad at you. But I've never seen it as something that's immoral. Like, the only reason I don't do it is because I don't want people to get mad at me, right? Not because I actually think that there's anything wrong with it, or because I actually give a shit. Like, I don't. I don't really have an issue with a kid, no matter what their age is, hearing a swear word. Because at the end of the day, it's just a series of syllables, okay? We have arbitrarily, as a society, decided what words are and aren't acceptable. So they're not just going to hear a certain type of sound wave and then suddenly have this trauma response after hearing the word. No, that's not going to fucking happen. Maybe they'll misuse the word, or they'll say it at school and get in trouble, but then they'll probably stop saying the word. Unless they're a complete contrarian like me, and then they might say it more. Actually, I don't know. I mean, they'll have to decide whether or not that's a hill worth dying on, and if they decide that it is, then they probably have other issues to deal with. In fact, there were a lot of hills that I was willing to die on that I shouldn't have been willing to die on when I was a little kid, and even that, for me, that wasn't one of them, which was very interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, it's like, okay, yeah, those are words that I would say a lot if there were no adults around, right? Because it's like, ooh, I'm doing the bad thing. I'm doing the thing that I'm not supposed to, which is cool, because I'm not supposed to do this thing. But it's like, okay, if we had just, if I had just been told by every adult, like, yeah, those words don't mean anything. I don't care if you use them. You can use them if you want. I think that they're silly, I guess. Those are some silly words, huh? aren't they? They don't really mean anything. I probably wouldn't use them very much, right? I would never have started using them because I'd have been like, well, it doesn't do anything. They're not impactful, right? But then on the other hand, you could make the argument that you sort of want there to be these almost I wouldn't consider them to be like taboo words because it's not like something where, oh, if you are somebody like me who makes content for like a more mature audience, if I say the word fuck or the word bitch, like, no, I'm not gonna get fucking canceled, right? Like, I do it all the time. Nobody cares, nor should they, except for maybe some like mentally insane religious person. But even then, that's rare, and I don't know how rare it is, but it's not something you generally see very often, right? But if that were to happen, right? Like if at a young age, like, you're told, oh yeah, by the way, the word fuck exists and it doesn't mean anything and you can use it whenever you want. Well, then we wouldn't have any, like, bad words to say when we're angry, right? So I feel like on one hand, it's like, it's good that, like, or it would be nice if, like, there was, like, if we just didn't give certain words power, but on the other hand, it is nice to have, like, some words you can use when you're angry, where it's like, you were taught as a child that these words hold a lot of weight, right? And because you were taught that, you now have developed this subconscious bias where now you believe that, okay, these words have a lot of weight behind them. And then if you get angry, it's really satisfying to use them. So in that sense, it's actually a good thing. Now, whether or not it ultimately is a good thing or not, I have no idea. I mean, actually, it's a better thing than you would think it is if you are similar to me. Because if you're like me, your default thought process would be, well, there's no logical reason to give a shit about these words. They're just fucking words, man. Like, I should be able to use whatever words I want. And while I agree with you, the other side of the coin there is, well, if these words were deemed to be just as acceptable as any other word English word in your vocabulary, right? Then there would be no swear words, right? There would be no such thing. In which case, okay, well, now that there's no such thing as a swear word, well, that's fucking boring, and we wouldn't be having this discussion, right? But then it's like, okay, the world is now a boring place, because it's not like it would be the same, but now everybody is allowed to use those words. Those words would just functionally not exist anymore, or they would exist the same way that any other word in the English language exists, right? Any non-offensive word, right? But if they became non-offensive words, then it's like, well, now you can't do the bad thing anymore, right? It's basically like having a language with no bad words, and that's fucking boring. So, it's like, and it's funny because it is the most counterintuitive position, right? And then you have people that do genuinely think that swearing is wrong or whatever the fuck, like these religious retards, right? And again, counterintuitively, the thing that would benefit their worldview the most would be not seeing those words as something that has any meaning. Because at the end of the day, like I said before, like, it's just a bunch of fucking syllables, right? It only means something because we as a society have decided that it means something. That is literally the only reason. And if Christian fundamentalists don't want there to be people using swear words, well, then take the existing swear words and make them not swear words anymore by saying them in a way, by making them non-offensive. Just say them so much, teach them to your kids, teach them that they're just silly words that don't mean anything, and then they become words that are silly and don't mean anything over time. So ultimately, it, again, most counterintuitive argument, right? But these are the logical follow-throughs. And I think that the reason why these logical follow-throughs may seem very backwards is because this entire argument comes from a place of contrarianism, right? Like, most people who would be on my side of the argument, or would start out by saying, like, oh, it's just words, who gives a shit, right? Like, that they're being contrarian whenever they use the words, right? But you can't be contrarian if everybody already agrees that those words aren't offensive. And then, yeah, again, the world becomes a more boring place. But then, again, it's very counterintuitive, which makes it fascinating, right? Like, but then it's like, okay, there are some words that maybe we as a society have given a little bit too much power to. And I think that, and I guess it's hard to come up with, like, a good solution for this. Like, for instance, let's take the N-word, for example, more specifically with a hard R at the end, right? I mean, personally, I don't say this word very often because it's not a very nice word to say. It might hurt somebody's feelings. Not trying to do that, not trying to be an asshole. I used to be the kind of person that enjoyed making people angry, and I still do it to an extent, but I feel like there needs to be, if I'm going to make somebody angry, it should be somebody that deserves to be angry, right? Like, so, like, that's why I don't say the word, right? Even though I'm not personally in opposition to the word being used in a non-derogatory context, I don't use it because, one, I think that it might still negatively affect people if I do, because they may take it the wrong way, even though I don't personally think it should matter if I'm white or black, because again, it's just my physical appearance. Like, if I looked like a black person, I would be able to say it just fine. No one would find it offensive. But again, I guess this comes from more of a place of consequentialism and less from a place of intent, the reasoning behind why I don't say it, even though I don't personally think it should be an offensive thing. And also, it's like, okay, if I were to say it, then the backlash would just be too inconvenient for it to be worth it, right? Like, it's not a hill that I'm willing to die on. Because if it was, I would be a fucking dumbass. A hill I will die on, though, is being able to say the retard word and the faggot word. And the reason I'm willing to die on that hill is because I'm autistic and bisexual. So I'm allowed to use those words, even if you want to be one of those, like, woke scold fucking losers that acts as the fun police and doesn't want you to use particular words. It's like, well, if I am a part of the group that those words supposedly affect, then I am allowed to say them. Like, I'm sorry, but if I have autism and am bisexual and I don't find those words offensive, then who does? Other autistic and bisexual people? Well, I mean, fair enough, but that would be like if there was, okay, if that's the logic we're going to use, what if, let's say there are some black people that think it's offensive to say the N-word even if you're black. Does that mean that other black people are no longer allowed to say the N-word? Like, is that how it works? Obviously, no. It's fine if they say it. And, it's like, obviously, we've sort of arbitrarily decided this as a society, and it's very obvious that it's arbitrary and doesn't really mean anything when you realize how there's not really a cutoff point, right? So let's say, for instance, are you allowed to say the N-word if you're mixed race in general? And, it's very difficult to say, because it's like, okay, if you're 50% black and you're 50% white, chances are that you are more likely to look black. But is it based on, is the right to say the N-word based on your physical appearance? Or is it based on your experience? Is it based on who you are on the inside? Well, it can't be based on who you are on the inside, right? Like, that is obviously not the standard that people hold it to, right? The reason I can't say it is because of what I look like on the outside. That's literally it. I mean, you could argue that it has more to do with my experience. Believe it or not, I didn't grow up in the hood. I know, that a real shocker. You guys must all be very surprised to hear that. I know, it's crazy. But I did not grow up in the hood. But then, if that's the reason why I can't say the N-word, does that mean that, like, black people who grow up rich are also not allowed to say the N-word? Well, that doesn't make sense. So it can't be that. What about what if somebody is black, but they're also albino. Well, now their skin is white, right? So it's not really about the color of your skin. It's about genetics, right? It's like, well, you have the DNA of a black person, right? And you have, like these other characteristics, like the curly or frizzy hair or whatever, and you're more likely to have like a wider nose or bigger lips, whatever. But it's like, okay, well, what if there is a white person that is born with a wide nose and large lips, and they have like curly hair or whatever. Maybe not curly hair, or maybe they get a buzz cut so you can't tell what it would look like if it was longer. So for all it could be curly hair. And maybe they're albino, maybe they're not, whatever. Are they allowed to say the N-word? Because they look exactly the same. But but their DNA is not black, so they're not allowed to say the same word, even though they look the same and you can't tell the difference. And it gets very confusing. And it's like, this is the most arbitrary and inconsistent shit imaginable. And it's like, okay, is somebody who is 25% black, 75% white allowed to say the N-word? What about 12.5% black? Where is the cutoff? Like, is there a certain percentage it has to be? And it's like, well, no, it's just, I guess you just get a vibe or whatever. And it's like, okay, and what about other races, right? Like, is it good, or sorry, not good, but is it fine for Mexicans to say the N-word? I mean, it's like, well, they're kind of like a minority group, but it's like, okay, but they're not, the N-word was never used against them. Or what about Asian people? Can they say the N-word? It's like, well, I don't know the answer. It's like, it's so arbitrary, and it's okay, what if somebody is Asian but they look black? Okay, do they get to say what about somebody from the don't people from the Dominican Republic look like they're black but they're not? I think they're different. I'm trying to I think it was, is it the Dominican Republic? I don't remember. There's some Spanish-speaking country, I believe, where they do look the same as any, like, African, right? Or any African American. Like, they don't look any different, or at least not to me. Maybe they do. I have no idea. Or what if, you're, like, it's so, like and it's like, okay, what if it's an Indian person? It's like, well, their skin is dark, but it's like, okay, they're not African, so they can't say. Okay, well, what if we've established that, like, oh, you can't say it if you're 4% black and 96% white or something. Okay, let's say we've established that somehow arbitrarily. Well, what if you're 4% black and 3% Mexican, 3% Asian, and 90% Indian? It's like, well, then can you say the N-word? It's like, if you believe that, like, Indians can't say the N-word, but it's like, well, then they're more likely to look like they're black. It's so fucking arbitrary. None of it makes sense. I don't understand why it has to exist the way it exists. Like, I do, but I don't. It's like, can we just like delete this word from, like, the English language? Can we just make it not exist so I don't have to think about this? I mean, I don't have to think about it, but in a sense, I don't always get to choose what I do and don't think about. I just sort of think about things, and then I say words as I am thinking about the whatever I am saying. Yeah, because I don't think before I speak. I think as I speak, And that's why I'm so good at podcast type of shit. Now I'm gonna drink water. But, yeah, but I don't understand why. But it's so weird because English is just so arbitrary as a language, and there's so many arbitrary rules that, like, everyone is expected to follow, and it's like, how many of these arbitrary rules should I be required to follow? I would argue none of them, but obviously society disagrees with me. So I'm gonna abide by some of them. It's like, not because I agree with them existing, but because it's like, okay, not a hill worth dying on. It's more effort to just, die on this hill that doesn't need to be fought for. Like, it's like, okay, realistically, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna die on the hill of oh, I should be able to say the N. It's like, I don't care. Like, realistically, what is an instance in which, me saying the N-word will be beneficial for me or anybody, right? Like, okay, it probably won't be, but again, it's like, okay, but what if it makes a joke funnier? But it's like, okay, well, it probably won't, because it's like, because it's been established that you're not supposed to say this. If you're white, it's like, well, if you do say it, then you're like saying it because you're racist, and it's like, well, obviously, generally speaking, yeah, that probably is correct. It could be an implicit way. I don't even know anymore. Like, it's so confusing. I don't it's like it's not even that I care that much. It's just, I don't, like, can it just be consistent? Like, can people just be consistent, please? Holy shit. Like, there is no, like, and maybe this is just because I'm fucking autistic, but I can't stand the fact that there is no, like, definitive line between, like, who is and isn't allowed to say it. Or is it like, oh, if you're not white but you're not black, like you're Asian, you're allowed to say it with like the A ending but not the ER ending? Like what even? Or like, what about Eminem? Is it okay if Eminem says the N-word? Or like, it's like, well, he kind of like, he probably could get away with it and no one would care. But it's like, what about, okay, why is it? It's weird because a lot of people, it's weird because I know iDubbbz always got a pass. He always had the N-word pass. Just because he was iDubbbz. I don't know why. It's like he was able to get away with it like no other man could. It's probably because his comedy, his style, like his entire style of comedy was more of like, I guess it came from a place of both like edginess and absurdism. Like, the whole point was to make these words meaningless. Like, that was his goal, right? He was not saying them in a derogatory way. But if somebody else were to use them in a similar vein, I think that there would be a lot more backlash. Not just because times are different or whatever, or because things are more offensive now than they used to be. I mean, sure, that might be part of it, is because society has changed, for the better and for the worse in some regards. But also because, I don't even know. Like, he was I mean, I know now he doesn't do it anymore. He has come to the same logical conclusion as me, which is that it isn't a hill worth dying on. Like, at the end of the day, like, do you really, like, outside of maybe, like, realistically, what is an instance in which you are going to say the word, right? Like, outside of maybe, like, a fucking, like, Discord VC with a bunch of edgy 15-year-olds. Like, realistically, you're not going to be using the word for very much, right? So it's like, okay, not really a hill worth dying on. I don't know why it took iDubbbz so long to realize that, but, I don't necessarily disagree with the points he made, for instance, in his Tana Mongu content comp, or whatever the fuck, but, it's like, was this really a hill worth dying on? But it's like, okay, but, like, he thought it was, but then also he didn't even die on the hill. Like, he stood fucking strong on the hill. Like, he thrived on that motherfucking hill. Like, I don't understand. Like, he's just built different, I guess. I guess it's, if you're funny enough, then you can get away with anything. Or, like, if you have, like, this sort of, like, charisma that most people don't, you can get away with a lot more things. Which I think is very true, right? I think that if you are well-spoken, and likable and funny, you can get away with a lot more than if you're not these things, right? So, I think ultimately, when it comes to whether or not you can say something, whether or not it is socially acceptable for you to do so, I think, 1, you have to determine who your audience is. 2, you have to, do it in a way that doesn't make you, look like an asshole, I guess. And 3, you have to, I don't know, just be self-aware. It's a very strange thing, but it's like, okay. And then it's like, okay, well, why is it wrong for, I don't know, people to say the N-word, but not a word like retard or faggot, right? Like, I say those words, and, like, there's no issue with that because I am both of those things, like, literally. So I would be the person that would be the victim of the heinous crime of being called a retard. Oh God, what will I ever do, right? It's like, I'm sure I've been called a retard at some point, but it has nothing to do with the fact that I have autism, right? So I've never taken offense to it. There's never been an instance where somebody, like, knows I have autism and then they're like, wow, you're such a retard, you have autism. It's like, there might be somebody who knows I have autism, and then if they get, like, mad at me because I did something stupid, or like I annoyed them on purpose, because I'm a petty motherfucker, they might call me a retard for that. But if it has nothing to do with me having autism, then it's not gonna offend me. Or if somebody uses, I guess, I don't know. It's like, okay, what about the word faggot? Again, I'm fine if straight cisgender people use that word as well. Like, I just don't give a shit. It's like, why would I? I think that it is valid if you use those words in a non-derogatory way. Like, okay, and maybe, I hate to be an anecdote Andy over here, right? But I have never met a single, like, autistic person or someone who is neurodivergent who has a problem with the word retard. I have not met a single one yet. Not a single one. Like, I don't understand why there are people like fucking Mr. Beard who will, like, virtue signal and be like, you're not allowed to say this word. It's like, shut the fuck up. Stop being the fun police. Like, it's so cringe and pathetic. And it's like, stop speaking on my fucking behalf, okay? These are words that would only affect me, and I don't give a shit. So you can fucking say them, okay? I have never met a single fucking autistic person who has a problem with the word retard. In fact, they are way more likely to use it than anybody else, okay? Specifically people with high-functioning autism, okay? We love the fucking retard word, okay? We say it all the time. We say it to each other. We say it to basically everybody, okay? Because it's a funny word. And that's literally all it is, okay? We've just turned it into a funny word. And I guess that's how we reclaimed it or whatever the fuck. But if Mr. Beard wants to be all politically correct and shit, okay, fine. We fucking reclaimed the word, and now we've collectively decided that it means fucking nothing, okay? Now everybody has the retard pass, okay? Yeah, all of you guys, regardless of who you are, you can say it as a joke. I don't care. Just don't say it as, like, a derogatory term against people that, are, like, autistic or whatever, or disabled, or etc., right? Like, don't use it derogatorily and you're fine. But, if you're just saying it as, like, a cheap insult, it's like, who gives a shit, right? And it's like, okay, what about the word faggot? It's like, okay, if you're using it because you hate gay people, and there are people that do that, okay, then yeah, don't do that. That's bad. You shouldn't insult someone for being gay in general. And using that word would just be one way to do it. But I say the word faggot all the time. Not just because I'm bi. I mean, I've used this word, before I was out, right? Like, before I even knew I was bi. And then I used it even more when I came out, because it's like, wow, now it's even funnier. But I've always loved the word faggot, okay? It's a great word. It has that sort of, like, oomph to it, you know what I'm saying? Like, it has that impact, it has this sort of, like, this sort of weight to it, it's fun to say, but the reason I don't always say it 24/7 is because then it would mean nothing to me, and it's like, I still want it to have, like, some amount of impact, right? Like, I do want some words to have, like, some meaning. I just don't want them to have too much meaning, right? So it's like, okay, I say that one a little bit less, but it's like, occasionally, if I really want to get my point across, I might say it, It's because it's a funny word. So, okay, so why is that okay? But then it's like, okay, what about... And it's like you can come up with all sorts of different examples of slurs that were used by different people towards different people, and it's like, okay, basically, like, there's always been some group of people, like, that's been discriminated against, and it's like, at this point, it's like, okay, basically, I mean, if you think about it, like, everyone on this planet would be discriminated against. Holy shit. I can't even fucking talk. At some point, if they were born at a different time in a different place. A specific, because, like, let's say, for instance, you were born, before Irish people were seen as people. Like, they were seen as, like, black people, but white. Like that, like they were seen as low class citizens, right? They were seen as lesser than. But today, I don't even think that, like, the Anglo-Saxons even fucking exist. Like, I don't think anybody is like purely Anglo-Saxon anymore. I don't think that's even a thing. Because why the fuck would it be, right? So because that entire fucking that entire group of people, I guess, doesn't even exist anymore. I guess everybody would be, if they were born back then with the genetics they have now. I guess unless I don't even know. How would you even know? I guess. Well, no, because I guess you would be able to blend in. You know what? You get the fucking point. All right, you know what I mean. All right, like. There would be, or, let's say you were born in the Middle East, where the Taliban is, or where ISIS is, or you went there, you would be discriminated against, right? So it's like, okay, like, anybody can be discriminated against. There can be slurs that apply to anybody. Some are taken more seriously than others. Like, who realistically, who gets offended by the word cracker? Fucking nobody, all right? Nobody except for, like, I don't know, like, retarded people, I guess. Ooh, funny. Get it? Because I said, I used the retard word to describe, I used one slur to describe somebody who gets offended by another slur. You see what I did there? It's comedy gold. But, like, it's such a weird thing where it's like, okay, okay, obviously, nobody gets offended by the word cracker, right? But then it's like, okay, then there are these other words where it's like, there's like this middle area, right? Where it's like, well, you can kind of say them, but only in like these certain contexts. So it's very context dependent, right? And it's like, okay, you can say them, but like only sometimes and only in some ways. And then there's some, or really mainly one, I guess, where it's like you just can't say it at all if you look like this, basically, right? Which is a very interesting thing. I've always wondered why that is. Why do we give some words more power than others? Why is why do we hold, I don't know, let's say the word retard at higher esteem than the word cracker? Okay, like, okay, both of them are could be used, at least hypothetically, to discriminate against whatever group of people, but it's like, okay, but like nobody gives a shit, right? But like people give less of a shit about one than the other. It's like, but like nobody, like the people that these words are directed towards aren't getting offended by them, right? And it's like, okay, so if that's, but it's like, okay, if that's the case, then why would they be offensive? And it's like, well, because they have history. But like they all have history, and it's like, what? It gets very, like, again, the water gets very muddy. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the English language, it's just a bunch of syllables being pronounced, and they only have the meaning that we as a society collectively agree that they have, I guess, for the most part. But it's like, okay, what if we all collectively agreed that the N-word doesn't mean anything anymore? Well, I'm not saying it would solve racism, but like it would be more difficult to use that in a derogatory way, right? Like, let's say that suddenly like everybody in society just collectively agreed that the N-word was equivalent to saying silly goose. Okay, well then, I mean, can you say the word silly? Can you call somebody a silly goose in a derogatory way? I mean, you can try, but you'll look like a silly goose if you do so, right? So if suddenly society just decided that the N-word suddenly just meant silly goose, then it wouldn't have any meaning anymore. It wouldn't be offensive. It couldn't be used in a derogatory way. I feel like the people that get offended by it the most, right, are the people that give it the most power. And obviously, I'm not saying that as like a justification for using it specifically in a derogatory way. Like, you shouldn't do that. You just shouldn't be an asshole in general, right? But I think it's fascinating how the people who are on the very extreme end, either extreme end really, are the ones that give it so much power, right? People that use it in a derogatory way are just reaffirming why it's a bad word and why it shouldn't be said, and the context that it was basically meant for. And then the people that get offended by it the most are the people that, are also giving it power, because it's like, well, if we choose to get offended by it, we are validating the fact that this word is offensive and has meaning. And because the fact that it has meaning and is offensive is being validated, it continues to be offensive and have meaning, which allows people to use it in a derogatory way, and the cycle never ends, right? I'm sure it'll end eventually, and at some point, like, the word won't mean anything, right? But it's like, okay, because the word doesn't, or because the word does have meaning, is it bad to say it? It's like, well, I mean, I guess it depends on the context, but generally, if the overwhelming reaction of saying a particular word is negative, then probably maybe don't say it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, let's say I know there were a few, like, mentally insane people, like people who are completely fucking deranged, who think that the word femboy is a slur. Now, obviously, those people are fucking retards, right? And that's only a select few people on Twitter that, like, actually believe that. But let's say there was a larger proportion of the population that actually felt like it was offensive. Specifically, let's say that the trans community especially hated that word. Okay, that wouldn't make it any less valid, right? Or at least it shouldn't. I would say, fuck you, I'm gonna keep calling myself a femboy, cry about it. But then it's like, okay, so what if somebody, okay, so why is that different from somebody a white person calling themselves the N-word? And it's like, well, is it? And it's like, well, logically speaking, it should be the same, right? But then it's not. But it's like, am I being inconsistent? Or is it just, oh, well, this isn't something I care about? Is it because, well, I mean, the word doesn't really mean anything other than a means of insulting a black person, unless you're black, in which case you don't use it usually to insult a black person, and if you do, it's not a way of saying you hate black people, because it's like, well, I mean, if you look at me, I'm black, so it wouldn't be logical or make sense for me to hate them. So it's like, okay, it gets very confusing, I guess. It's like, when does it like when does it end? When does it stop being so goddamn confusing? I have no idea. I think it's just gonna continue to be confusing, and then more confusing, and the more you think about it, the less it makes sense. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like, why does the English language even need to have things like the N-word? Does it really serve any utility? No, not really. But I mean, obviously, it does serve some utility, but a lot of the time it's used from like bad actors who want to use it to say hurtful things, or alternatively, it could be used, to just reclaim a word, and it's like, well, this word was used against my group of people in the past, and we've reclaimed the word. But it's like, if the goal is to make it mean nothing, right, then it's like, why would you get offended when people use it in a non-derogatory context, right? But then it's like, okay, but how do you know that they're not saying it to be offensive? Because usually if people say it, they're trying to be offensive, and if they're trying to be offensive, what is their goal? Are they just trying to do a ha-ha funny, or are they trying to, or do they genuinely hate this group of people? And it's a mess. It's literally just a mess, and it's like, okay, I think that things like this need to be talked about more often, and people need to give, like, their actual opinions on these things, because it's like, nobody is fucking consistent. Can we just be consistent for once? Like, I don't even care what the ultimate outcome is. I just want people to be consistent on these things, and decide, okay, yeah, either this word is or isn't okay, not, well, it's kind of okay sometimes, and then, like, if you look like this, then you can say it, probably, kind of, but then, like, if you look like this, you can't, even though you're, like, basically the same, but slightly different, and it's like, okay, but there's no line, and it's like, we just judge it on a case-by-case basis, but it's all completely arbitrary anyways, and it's like, why does it have to exist? I don't even fucking know anymore. It just does. It just exists for the sake of existing, and nothing else. I don't think it should exist. I personally wish it didn't exist as a thing that exists. I mean, that would be nice. If it just stopped existing, the world would be a better place. I'm just saying. At least that's my opinion. That is my take on it. But yeah, the world would be a better place if there wasn't such a I guess inconsistent philosophy that we as a society hold towards the way we use our words, right? It's like, nobody is consistent on any of it. Nobody is consistent on how we should use language to describe things, or how we should communicate information. And I think that this goes back into the whole idea of neopronouns. What do neopronouns try to communicate? And the reason I'm going back to this is not only because it's the title, but I think it's still relevant, right? It's like, what information is this communicating? And, it's like, okay, so if I use somebody's neopronouns before I know who they are as a person, I'm not going to know what those neopronouns mean unless, I've done a lot of research. Now, I don't think that I'm obligated to do very much research when it comes to somebody's pronouns. I think that that's fucking stupid, right? Because that ultimately produces the negative outcome of my time being wasted, okay? On something that doesn't really matter that much, or at least something that shouldn't be seen as something that matters. So, maybe I just don't want to spend that much time thinking about it or researching it, right? And maybe I do for fun. I probably will, honestly, just do a little bit more research. I'm not gonna lie, but, it's like, okay, so why is it then, like what is being communicated? Like, obviously, it's like, okay, there's something, they're trying to communicate something, but if nobody understands the information that they are communicating, and to the outside world it appears to be gibberish, then why do you need the outside world to say things that the outside world perceives as gibberish? I don't really understand what the goal there is, right? It's not going to make people understand you better, right? You might want to describe, if you want people to look into it, or look into people similar to you, you might want to find very specific adjectives or groups of people, but that doesn't necessarily have to be indicated by your pronouns. Your pronouns can just be non-specific, because ultimately, I don't think that pronouns determine who somebody is as a person. I think that they can maybe give you sort of a hint as to what somebody's gender identity is if you use he or she pronouns, I guess. But if you use they, them pronouns, you're basically saying, well, I don't identify with any of that, right? It's like, I do my own thing. Now, I will say that, do I think neopronouns are completely useless? Maybe not. Now, I've heard DemonMama's side of the argument, which is that it functionally does the same thing. And what I mean by that, and this is how she described it, was people like me, right? People like me tend to just kick down the box, right? So what I mean by that is there are a couple boxes. There's male, like there's man and woman, right? Well, people like me just kick down those boxes and say, fuck you, I'm gonna do whatever the fuck I want, right? That's people like me. And then on the other side of the aisle, you have sort of like the opposite approach, where people who use neopronouns and whatnot and identify with Xenogender, people like that, are like, oh, okay, society, you want me to make a box? Fine. Or yeah, like, okay, society, you want me to pick a box? Okay, fine. I'm gonna make my own box then. Yeah, there you go. I picked my own fucking box, bitch. Like, and it's like they functionally do the same thing, right? Because ultimately, if you make it so inconsequential and meaningless, then obviously, okay, I guess that could be one way of abolishing gender. And I think that she even made a very good point, which is that these are not necessarily conflicting ideas, that they might actually be complementary. I'm not sure if they're complementary. I don't think that they're necessarily contradictory, but yeah, maybe they are complementary in that they do accomplish the same goal. I'm not sure. Ultimately, I just want to not even have to think about gender as a concept. I just want to be able to express myself however the fuck I want. Again, gender abolition does not mean that I am against femininity or masculinity, right? Like, I don't think that we need to be in this disgustingly boring, sterile world where everybody is extremely, it looks exactly the same and there's no masculine or feminine expression. And it's like, as nice as it would be to see more androgynous people, that's like, it's like, okay, but nobody should be forced to be androgynous, right? It's like, if you want to be very feminine or very masculine, you have the right to do so. I think that there is a difference, though, between femininity, masculinity, and then you have, it gets so confusing. It's like, okay, you have so many different variables, right? So, the first variable you have is sex, right? Just are you born with a dick or a vagina, or what are your chromosomes, whatever the fuck, maybe you're intersex, who fucking knows, right? And then you have gender, which is like, okay, do you identify as a man, woman, non-binary, like, that type of thing. I guess it's more like the internal perception, I guess, would be a way of describing it, but it's also a way that society sort of categorizes you, so it's also a form of categorization, but then also sex is also a form of categorization for some people, which I don't think it needs to be. I think it's completely arbitrary, okay, and then we have gender expression, which is the way you express your gender, but it's like, okay, but that has nothing to do with your gender. I mean, it can, and also, you can decide to not have it be that way, right? Like, for instance, if you wear a dress, that doesn't make you any less of a man, right? But that is still a form of gender expression. You are expressing your gender, in a way. Maybe it's a more contrarian type of way, but you are still expressing some sort of gender expression nonetheless. However, if you are, let's say, I guess, it's like, okay, so what if you're non-binary, but you present completely femininely? Are you trans femme? Are you just non-binary? Because it's like, okay, well, what do you see yourself as? What does the world see you as? What is relevant here, right? Like, if you want the world to see you as extremely feminine, maybe womanly, perhaps, do you identify as a woman? Well, maybe not, because obviously nobody can make you identify as anything. But it's like, what do these identities even mean at this point, right? It's like, and I think that these boxes are also being expanded upon. So there are actually 3 forms of gender abolition, which is kind of interesting, right? There's my way of there's my form of gender abolition, which is just not giving a fuck about gender. Use whatever fucking pronouns you want with me. I don't care. It doesn't mean shit to me. I know who the fuck I am, alright? There's no boxes. You can draw imaginary boxes around me, but don't get mad at me when I don't, fit into any of them, and I just, kind of, cross all the lines and shit, because I'm not gonna avoid doing so, because I don't give a fuck. You kidding me? I don't care about these arbitrary lines that you've established. Like, go fuck yourself, right? And then there are, there's sort of like the Xenogender Neopronoun approach, which is make infinitely many boxes, because then they all overlap each other, and then there are functionally no boxes. And then there's the approach that I used to take, which is that, it's not necessarily a gender abolitionist approach, but I think it came from a place of gender abolition. Now, I at the time framed it as a transphobic argument, because, conservative propaganda kind of works on disaffected 13-year-olds, unfortunately, and that's exactly who I was. But I saw it in more of a gender abolitionist kind of way, where it's like, well, and at the time I conflated sex and gender, and that was also part of the problem. So because I saw them as the same thing, I'm like, well, gender is not your personality. What you're describing here is your personality traits. You can do whatever the fuck you want. You can be a man, you can wear and wear a dress, but that doesn't make you not a man. And that was my logic that I used against trans people. Without even, I didn't even realize that I was actually in favor of gender abolition at the time. I framed it in a way that made it seem, popular among conservatives or whatever the fuck, because it's like, well, that's like the logical Ben Shapiro way, right? Because Ben Shapiro is logical and spits facts. There's only two genders type of shit. And it's like, I bought into that, but I was still logically minded enough to know that it's like, okay, but like, you shouldn't like be forced into any boxes. Now, even though I was being a little bit of a hypocrite by saying, yeah, these boxes still exist, I was saying, well, you can still stretch these boxes as much as fucking possible, right? Like, I don't care how much you stretch these boxes, you can keep stretching them infinitely, okay? And in a way, if those boxes stretch infinitely, then they functionally don't exist. So, even though I didn't realize it at the time, and I would have gotten fucking pissed off if you had told me this at the time, if someone had told me this, but my position was indirectly a left-wing position framed as a conservative position. That is literally what it was. I framed it as a conservative position and even tried using it sort of against transgenderism, but not entirely. And then I fell down like the trans medicalism route, which moved me slightly left, because then it's like, well, okay, but then it's like, okay, I wasn't sure about non-binary, and it's like, okay, so wait, gender dysphoria means that like that gender does matter, I guess. And then I was like, I went down that whole fucking path, I guess. And then it was like, okay, but then why do I give a shit? And then I stopped giving a shit. Then I realized, oh wait, non-binary is actually valid. Like, who gives a shit? It's like, maybe people don't want to be in any of those boxes. And I guess that's sort of what led me to the approach I take today. Is it's like, well, you know what? The boxes can go fuck themselves. You want to put me in the box? Okay, fine. If you put me in that box, the box is infinitely large. If you don't think that my behaviors fit into that box or don't belong there, fine, then I'm not in that box. I don't have to be. If you want that box to be small, then I'm just not in it, or I cross the lines a lot. If you it's like, at the end of the day, like, no matter what, I win, right? It's like, I'm either in the box or I'm not, but I do whatever the fuck I want. So it's like, you can't make me do anything or prevent me from existing the way I want to exist, right? Like, it's just not gonna happen. I do my thing, I do whatever the fuck I want, and if you tell me not to, I'm gonna be a contrarian. Like, that's just who I am as a person. I do the opposite of what people tell me to, because doing the opposite of what everyone wants me to do is fucking based and red-pilled, okay? It is based and red-pilled, and you cannot change my mind on this ever, okay? That's just how it is. I'm just sitting here spitting facts. I'm sorry. I know I'm right. And you know what? If you don't like the fact that I'm right, oh well, that sucks, I guess. I guess you could cry about it if you want. I'm not gonna stop you, but I'm gonna continue doing my own thing. But in terms of neopronouns, I don't honestly know whether or not they're valid. I guess I wouldn't, I would try to respect them. I don't know how good of a job I would do. I will say, though, that I would probably be better at using Z's or pronouns than, like, I don't know, it/its pronouns. I don't know what it is about me and it/its pronouns, but I cannot, and it's not like I'm, like, refusing to, or that I, like, think that there's anything wrong with it necessarily. It's just, my brain does not allow me to see someone as it/its pronouns for whatever reason, because my stupid ape brain just hears the words it/its and thinks inanimate object, and it's like, well, I don't want to see human beings as inanimate objects. What the fuck? No. And I know that, like, that's not the point, right? It's like, oh, you just sort of want to be seen as, like, this, like, I don't know, just this other sort of entity, I guess, like, here is this entity, it exists, type of thing, I guess. Like, that's a very terrible explanation, but, like, that is how I understand it, or at least I'm making an assumption. I guess I've never really heard an explanation that explains it well. I've never really even heard an explanation for it. But, I mean, if some people want to use that, they can use that, I don't care. Actually, now that I think of it, that might be one of, like, the only, that might actually be a pronoun that I don't like being used on me. Like, okay, I'm fine with he, she, they. I'm even fine with people using neopronouns on me. I'm not so sure about it/its, Because then I might feel like people are saying I'm an object. And I don't like that. Well, I mean, if you're doing it in a kinky way, then you can use its pronouns as much as you fucking want, all right? If you're doing it in like a kinky humiliation kind of way, fucking go for it, all right? I encourage you to do this shit, okay? But unless you're doing that, unless you're doing it in like a humiliation / kinky type of way by, being like, yeah, that is an inanimate object over there, right? Like, just, completely objectifying me, right? It's like, okay, but if your goal is not to objectify me, then maybe don't use those. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could, but it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I wouldn't be mad at somebody if they used them, because it's like, well, I technically do say that I use any and all pronouns, but I feel like it's not very efficient to say, oh yeah, I use every single pronoun except for the ones that I don't use. It's like, well, I shouldn't have to specify. Like, I shouldn't have to give a list of pronouns that I don't use. Oh yeah, by the way, I don't want to be referred to as I don't want you can't use the N-word as my pronouns. And you can't use anti-disestablishmentarianism as my pronouns, because that would be annoying to hear. And you can't use. It's like, okay, it's like, okay, maybe it's sort of implied when I say any and all. It's like, okay, you're probably just gonna use he, she, or they. I would be very surprised if someone used a neopronoun with me, unless they were like, I guess like, I don't know, like doing it just to be interesting or weird, or just to troll, maybe even. I don't know. I don't know why anyone would go out of their way to do that, because it's like, okay, yeah, those are technically pronouns, I guess, maybe. It's like, okay, if you want to go out of your way to do that, more power to you. I don't care. I mean, if you're just communicating the same information that you would be if you were using a different set of pronouns, good for you. I don't give a shit. If that's genuinely how you see me, fine, whatever. Again, people labeling me does not affect me as a person, so if that's how people label me, that's how people label me. If there is genuinely someone out there that thinks that neopronouns fit me well, I don't understand it, but okay, if they want to label me that way, fine. If they're putting me in a box, fine. I'm not gonna abide by any of it, and I'm gonna cross all the lines. Especially if you make those lines visible. The more visible the lines are, the more likely it is I will cross them, because I go out of my way to cross as many lines as possible, right? Because I hate being confined to anything, right? Like, I am against being confined, okay? I think that I think that being confined inside of a box is generally a bad thing, right? That's why I dress the way I do. Well, that's one of the reasons. I also just want to feel cute, all right? Is it such a bad thing that I just want to be seen as like cute and adorable sometimes? Like, is that really such a bad thing for me to want that as somebody who was born as a male? Like, who the fuck cares? Like, it's funny because a lot of the time, like, even though I'm non-binary, right? It's like people don't even know what the fuck I am anymore. Like, they don't even know if I'm non-binary or male, or am I a trans woman? I've had a few people ask me if I'm a trans woman. I've had a few people like be like, "Are you non-binary? Are you a trans woman?" Like, people just not being sure. A lot of people just think I'm a guy that cross dresses, which is kind of what I am. So it's like that. It's like because like I guess a lot of people see me as a guy, at least as soon as they hear my voice, because I have a very masculine sounding voice. And it's not like I have like super long hair or anything. Like, it's long for a guy, but not that long for a dude. Like, there are plenty of dudes that have hair like this, right? But maybe not. No, I think so. I think they do. There's quite a few. Like, this is still basically a boy's haircut, right? I don't know. It's pushing it. It's pushing it, which is deliberate, right? Like, the whole point is to push it. If I'm not pushing any boundaries or pushing people's buttons, I'm doing something wrong. I'm failing at my job. My one goal in life is to push as many people's buttons as possible, okay? If I'm not doing that, then I've fucked up, okay? That is me failing at my job as not only a content creator, but as a contrarian in the world, okay? I've got to push people's buttons as much as possible, cross as many lines as possible, walk on the fence as much as possible, be as much of a smartass as I can, okay? make as many people angry as possible within reason, because obviously I don't want to make people angry for no reason, right? It's like, well, unless they're just being stupid, right? It's like, okay, they're a stupid person, right? It's like then maybe they deserve to be angry because they're getting mad over nothing, like literally nothing, as opposed to just me saying things that are like give somebody a genuine reason to be angry, but there was no reason for me to make them angry in the first place, is what I really mean by that. Yeah, I think that ultimately words are a very strange thing. And I don't even know what the fuck they mean anymore. Because at the end of the day, they only mean what society generally believes that they mean. And no matter what I think they mean, it doesn't change the actual meaning. Sure, if I were to misuse a word enough times, maybe some close friends or people that, maybe even people that watch my content, might have a different outlook on the word. But again, that's not going to change the word itself. Like, that's just, I mean, it will to an extent. It's like, well, now there's this small group of people that uses it differently. Yeah, no, that doesn't necessarily mean that the word is completely changed. I mean, it's like, okay, well, if the rest of society, aside from the few people that are subscribed to me, see it as whatever, it's like, well, then it's still going to be whatever, until there are more people that pick up on it, I guess. It's like, the English language is just, I mean, any language, right? Like, it's not even just the English language. The only reason I'm talking about the English language is because that's the one that I know the best. But I am aware that other languages, like, all of the things I'm saying applies to other languages. Something I find very interesting is, what about the Spanish language? How would you refer to a non-binary person in Spanish? What pronouns would you use there? Because it's everything in Spanish is either feminine or masculine. So how... If there are any Spanish speakers or well, I mean, I speak, but like people that are like native Spanish speakers, I guess, is what I mean by that. Porque yo puedo hablar español también. Es que mi español es una puta mierda y yo no hablo mucho español, es solo que hablo un poco, ¿ok? Solo un poco. All right, I only speak a little bit of Spanish, all right? Like, I'm not, maybe a little bit more than a little, okay? Mi español no es el peor, pero no soy un nativo, obviamente. I'm obviously not a native speaker, right? So it's like, okay, if somebody who's a native Spanish speaker can tell me how non-binary people refer to themselves or want to be referred to as in Spanish, like, do you have, like, neopronouns in Spanish? Or what? Or do you just like switch back and forth between masculine and feminine every other sentence? Like, how do you? Well, probably not that. Maybe I don't even know, because that's not necessarily gender neutral, and I know there are a lot of people that just don't care about gender. Or alternatively, it's like, okay, well, maybe you just like make a new word, but like that's like the one that is like, like in the middle or something. I don't even know anymore. Like or like you just have like one set of neopronouns for like all non-binary people, and then you can make even more than that. I don't even know. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing. How do you identify as a non-binary person in Spanish? I have no fucking idea. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I was originally going to sit here and record 2 episodes of the podcast in one sitting. But I don't really want to do that because, I feel like just having 1 hour and a half long episode is probably better, because I feel like there were a lot of things I wanted to say, and I don't have it in me to record for another hour. I mean, I could, but then my family would probably get annoyed, because it's like, well, I can only record for so long before it gets annoying, because, people might start trying to sleep and whatnot, and I don't want to be that person that just sort of, like, keeps people awake. So I guess, I'm probably going to be wrapping up the podcast soon. Maybe there are a few more things I'm going to say. Actually, no, there's probably not. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to say. Ultimately, I don't even know what my conclusion here is. I just wanted to talk about things with a vague sort of direction, but I think I went off topic pretty quickly. But it's like, well, I make the title and the thumbnail first, and then I record second a lot of the time. Or, well, I usually make the title, then I record, then I make the thumbnail. Or, well, I edit and then make the thumbnail. You know what I mean. I should probably like at least know what the thumbnail is going to be before I start recording. Or make the thumbnail first. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. It's like recording is fun. It's like, how could I not want to do this? Like, first thing, right? It's like, well, okay, there are a lot of instances where I don't, but it's like when I do want to record, why wouldn't I? Oh wait, there's no reason for me not to. Therefore, I am going to do exactly the thing that, yeah, you know what I mean. All right, anyways, goodbye everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you did, make sure to leave a like. My channel is Femyoz. It is in the description below. You can click on it, and you will see my channel. And if you like the videos on there, first you got to check it out. But yeah, if you see the videos on there and then they are interesting to you and you like them, make sure to subscribe to that channel. At least watch a few videos, right? Like I'm just saying, especially if you enjoyed this. If you made it this far, you will almost certainly enjoy what I have to say on there. Even if you don't enjoy the videos, maybe you enjoy the streams. I mean, the streams are almost kind of podcast-like, except for the fact that I'm doing live debates, so I'm basically yelling at people a lot of the time. But aside from that, it's basically like a podcast, and I also interact with chat, which is, in reality, it's just me being bullied by chat the whole time whenever I'm not debating somebody. It's funny because I will, just be like very, not always, but there's been one exception to this, but most of my debates, like I'm very assertive. I'm basically giving off all this like top energy. I'm basically like a dom whenever I'm debating somebody, right? So much top energy, so much dominant energy. But then the rest of the time, fucking chat bullies me. So it's the complete opposite. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's because I sort of lower my wall for people that like me, as opposed to people that dislike me or are engaging in some sort of conflict, or if it's like a debate, it's like, okay, I'm obviously going to put some sort of wall up where it's like, okay, here's my wall of defense, and I'm going to shoot projectiles over the wall and onto your head, or some shit. I don't even know. That's basically what I do. But if there's not a reason for me to do that, then I just climb down the wall, and then I guess I'm being myself more, but then also it's like, I'm more likely to get bullied by chat, which is unfortunate, I guess, or fortunate if you're chat. You probably enjoy it. You know what? Fair enough. I mean, I enjoy it too sometimes, okay? I can't lie. I definitely don't hate it at the very least. Anyways, bye, smash like, subscribe, and tune in for next week. Yeah, next week. Yep. Goodbye.